Welcome to another episode of Artemis News Media. It is November 21st, 2023, and today let's get into the United Nations. Who is the United Nations? Who are their affiliates? What are their actual and true goals? And why do we follow their recommendations if it goes against the well-being of the populace in said country? Also, what roles do larger corporations play in this? The reason for this is because once you understand the actual composition of the United Nations, how all of the countries are involved in the United Nations and making decisions, then we can kind of understand where we need to go further in order to bring balance to our sovereignty and our freedoms, because the corporations and the UN have combined and conglomerated into this powerhouse where they have protected themselves with money and power. It has become almost impossible to penetrate them from the inside or the outside. And the only thing that we have left is to basically build a parallel society that is parallel to the society that we have right now, but we can use it in case they do come down on us in a tyrannical way to balance out the power by taking away their money and their power, and putting it into local businesses and small businesses and businesses that are for the people and the populace, and not by this agenda that is led by the United Nations and the ESG system, which I will get into in this video. So in order for you guys to understand where the United Nations came from, we actually have to go all the way back to World War I. And in World War I, they made something similar to the UN. It was kind of like their first prototype of the United Nations. And it was basically signed under the Paris Peace Conference in 1920. And the union that came about was called the League of Nations. And with the League of Nations and also another IGO, which is an intergovernmental organization called the Universal Post Union, they basically built this outline of a group of nations that come together to try and stop wars or any future wars from happening. Now, as we know now, World War II did happen, so the League of Nations under the Paris Peace Conference actually did not work, but it was the first prototype for the United Nations. Now, while World War II was happening, the UK government and the United States government decided to make an Atlantic Charter. And when they signed said charter, they actually signed it in Newfoundland, Canada, which is really interesting because the agreement was between the UK government and the US government to see how they would collaborate during wartime, and also the post-war agenda, how they would pretty much take the international system, rebuild it, and put it under something called the United Nations. And in the beginning, this is while World War II had even started, Churchill and Roosevelt from the United States decided to make this charter, or how should I say this, partnership in the war. The British were hoping that the Americans would join them as allies. However, Roosevelt felt that the populace at home in the United States was against World War II and entering World War II, so they did not want to basically get involved. However, they said that they would help their British counterparts if they would try and get the imperial monarch system out of Britain. And that was kind of like the initial agreement. Now, that was formulated until Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in World War II, kind of forcing the American populace and the Americans into World War II as a participant. So from there on, the Canadians, the UK, and the American government in Quebec, Canada, decided to come together under a secret military, how should I say this, military operation called the Quadrant. And they decided there that they would start something similar to the League of Nations and the Union Postal Services, to combine their powers and build what we know today as the United Nations. Now, before I go any deeper, let me just show you some of the websites that I found. So we have here the formation of the United States, the formation of the United Nations, which happened in 1945. And that was exactly after World War II. Now, the United Nations, their entire goal, I guess, was to basically prevent another world war from happening, which is exactly what the League of Nations tried to do, but they didn't do anything. So this goes through the entire structure of how the UN basically came to be. And Roosevelt also sought to convince the public that an international organization was the best means to prevent future wars. So the Senate approved the UN Charter on July 28th, 1945, by a vote of 89 to 2. And the United Nations came into existence on October 24th, 1945, after 25 nations had ratified the Charter, which is really interesting because we already know that we tried to do this with the Legion of Nations and it didn't work. So once again they were trying to build a world government that would help end future wars. However, what's really interesting is if we look at this website, it will actually tell you, over here, I don't know if you guys can see my little let me get that arrow going, that the United States, Great Britain, Soviet Union, and China would enforce peace as the four policemen, while the other member states and executive committees would discuss social and economical issues. Now, from the United Nations initial initiative, then came the Food and Agricultural Organization, the United Nation Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, the United National Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and then the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which is super interesting to see considering that their entire goal was just basically to stop and prevent people from going into a world war. So now we get into who is the IMF. And we've heard a lot about the IMF and a lot of the decisions that they make. And apparently, if we go on to the IMF website, we get to know what the World Bank and the IMF is about. Now, the World Bank is apparently an international development organization owned by 187 countries. Its role is to reduce poverty by lending money to the governments of its poorer members to improve their economies and to improve the standard of living of their people, which I find extremely interesting and extremely almost hypocritical to what they are doing. So the way the United Nations works and the way its affiliates. So think of the United Nations as the trunk of the tree, and all of its branches are kind of its affiliates and its NGOs. And with each affiliation, they pretty much take the agenda that the UN has and pushes it through to other nations. Now, the membership and the members of the United Nations actually pay into the UN. This is how the UN gets funding. And they also take volunteer charity from said members. The United States is actually the largest charity foundation for the United Nations, and they give them the most money. And the IMF is exactly the same way. All of these members pay membership into the IMF, and the IMF then goes from country to country to advise as a consultant on how the country should manage its economics, its taxation. That's correct. So it's not the fact that we decide where our tax money goes. The IMF decides where our tax money goes. And the World Bank is a conglomerate of all of these countries owning banks and money and then lending it out to poorer countries, but they can only get the money if they follow the UN protocols. Now, what are these UN protocols? It's basically environmental and social justice change, and in a sense of social cultural revolutions through human behavior, through propaganda, and so forth. They're trying to change us. Now, the corporations that are involved with the United Nations, the IMF and the World Bank, they get a report card, something called the ESGs. ESG stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance. So it's kind of like a report card. Now, imagine if you went to the bank and you told them that you would like to build a house, and they looked at your social credit score and they saw that you didn't recycle, or they saw that you used too much plastic in a year, and they tell you that they will not give you money unless you absolutely change your behavior. This is the level of the games that we're playing with the United Nations and the IMF and the World Banks. So if you see certain news articles such as Africa doesn't want the Western countries and the UN to come in and give them help, is because when they offer them 30 million or 50 million for any of their programs that they need, they require that country then in return to absolutely make social and cultural changes to their people so that they can get that money. And that is why a lot of the BRICS nations now are coming together and basically saying, we are no longer going to be your lapdogs. We don't want to do what you want us to do. We do not want to follow your rules. We have a culture. We have what we need. We just need monetary funds that we can then pay you back in return. And so now, even though the Soviet Union and China and the United States and the UK are together in this notion, China and Russia have started to pretty much kind of build their own parallel system so that they can hold the power. Now, what I'm thinking with us regular folks that nobody seems to consider in any of their plans is that we decide to make a parallel structured society that is mimicking the UN, but for us. And that way we have leverage. So if they ever come down with any tyrannical laws that they want to change or any tyrannical things that they want to impose on us, we can speak with our money and our action where we put our money and who we fund depending on the game that is being played at the time. So what's really interesting with the UN as well is once they got all of the large governments and large corporations in, and they really solidified their power, they then decided to go out and make something that is, I believe, in Charter 71. Let me just look at my notes here. I apologize. I believe it's Charter 71, Chapter 10, or sorry, Article 71, Chapter 10, the UN created the Economic and Social Council, so the ECOSOC. And this council then acts as a consulting agency to non-government organization, NGOs. And so far, since April 2021, the UN has 5,593 NGOs that work underneath it that then have direct effects on us on a local level, including our bylaws, how we run our municipalities, and so forth. And the way they did this is any NGO can sign up and say that I would like to push the agenda for the UN, whether it's for social change, environmental change. You apply with the UN gives you grants. And I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars, such as the C40 group, WEF, the World Economic Forum. These are all tinier branches off of the bigger stump of what is now the conglomerate of the UN. And what these NGOs do is they entice our mayors, and I will get into the mayoral groups that they have and all of these specific NGOs that actually affect our everyday life, including our bylaws, our mayors, how we run everything, or how we use our water, how we use our land, forestry, resources. Everything has been pretty much given to the UN, and the WHO is exactly the same way. So if you look at the UN, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, NATO, they are basically like the ministries. The UN will act as the head of state for every country. So they are the NWO because of all the members that are unelected, where we have voluntarily, as countries, given them our freedoms so that we can keep trading. So if you think that the UN and the WEF is just basically for us and for the environment, it is not. I will be showing on tomorrow's show how the WEF basically tells the countries, if you do not go along with our agenda, you will not be trading, your economy will die, and they will do things that they have done to other countries, third world countries, to basically get them in line with their system, either their banking system, their corporation system, or any of the social things that they would like to push on us. Now, the initial UN agreement was that all of its member states would just discuss social and economic issues to prevent wars. However, we have not seen one war prevented, and we have seen more wars since World War II up till now than we have in the history of the United States and Canada being countries. Now, I find that really interesting because the UN was established to be anti war, but yet they do not have a single policy on how they will end or prevent wars. So it seems like that this United Nations, especially the way it was made, which was in Quebec, Canada, by the way, under secret military meetings, that it was going to be a Trojan horse for the New World Order. Now, I understand that what the United States or the United Nations says on its websites about the environment and, everybody having equal rights seems absolutely utopian and a very positive. However, if you look at the details of who these companies are and who is involved with the United Nations and their initiatives, it becomes clear that they are using positive pictures and positive imaging to entice people and their behavior in order to get in line with what the UN wants. Now, once the UN was established, in the beginnings, it was basically just an organization talking about social issues, talking about economic issues, but not really doing anything about it. Until the 70s and the 80s, when BlackRock, Vanguard, and Blackstone decided to become conglomerate companies. So these are very rich and powerful people who came together, join their companies. So basically, one company owns the other, and it's just a loophole. And you don't really know who the owners are. The co-founder, one of the co-founders is Larry Fink. And what they did is they took all of the power and money and conglomerated it into these giant three companies that basically, so be very detail oriented, basically own the world. And what do I mean by that? If you have all of these super rich people who finance corporations and businesses, that means they get to dictate what these corporations and businesses do and how they operate and how they govern their own companies through something called ESGs. These are social credit score systems for companies to see if they're in line with not just the environmental factors of the United Nations, but the social push that they want. So if they want social change, the UN will use BlackRock, Vanguard, and so forth, who owns everything, including Hollywood movies, social media outlets, and they will push a change within people using propaganda. And we will get into an entire week of all the different types of propaganda that they use on us and how they pretty much hypnotize us almost or trick us into behaving how they want us to behave. Now, this is the social credit system that is already upon companies, large corporations and companies. And this is the credit system that they would like to put on us individually. That means if you ate meat more than 3 times in a month, you might not be able to get a social credit for your company or anything like that until you change your behavior. And so that's why we're seeing large corporations such as Target and Bud Light literally tank their own brand in order to push social change and social justice into the system. And the only way to basically get away from said system is to copy and see what the United Nations did with all these conglomerates, except do it on a small scale, small business, people for people kind of way. Because if you look at the statistics, 50% of the American economy actually comes from small businesses. So not corporations, not BlackRock, not Vanguard, and not Blackstone. It actually comes from people who are like you and myself, going around basically trying to live and have a small business. Now, with the United Nations, they are a front company, so they don't really push or make policies. The guys with the money, so the IMF, the World Bank, the three largest corporations such as BlackRock, Vanguard, and JP Morgan, and just giant conglomerates like that, they are the ones that actually push policy change on us on a federal level. The NGOs, such as the C40 group, the WEF, they push changes on a local level. And how do they do that? So if you know anything about the C40 group is they will entice cities to sign up to their initiative to make it as green as possible. And when you do and you reach a certain score, they will give you money to your city to build further. Now, this money is very minor compared to the budgets of some of our cities and how much money is actually needed to implement these plans. So that means our tax money goes towards funding the United Nations, and the United Nations then takes that funding, puts it into these NGO groups, and then these NGO groups tell us how we should live our life. Now, they have many NGOs. As I said, they have 5,593 NGOs as of 2021. I don't know if they have a lot more now, especially with all of the news and everything that has been coming out where, we're kind of catching up to some of the tricks that they're using on us, especially here in Alberta, where I've done probably 5 town hall meetings online and then a few in person, where I was trying to tell people, hey, listen, if you can just see these keywords, that means you know that your city or town or municipality has been infiltrated by these larger groups, and that we should probably get together as a society, as a populace, to really watchdog what these mayors and all of these local politicians are doing, because most of them are being enticed by money and goals that they need to reach, and they don't really understand that they are basically imprisoning future generations if any of these plans actually become a reality. And I will get into the World Economic Forum tomorrow. But if you're wondering, how does the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, work if the United Nations and BlackRock and Vanguard are completely separate? Well, they all work under the same system of ESGs. And let me just show you this. Here we go. This is the WEF. Here we go. Let me just try and make that bigger. Here we go. So the World Economic Forum appoints new members to Board of Trustees. And one of those members is Lawrence D. Fink. And Lawrence D. Fink actually owns BlackRock. Well, he's a co-founder. He doesn't own it. He's a co-founder of BlackRock, and he sits on the WEF. And the WEF works exactly the same way the UN does and the WHO. So now, why would we need this? Why would we need any of these organizations when they haven't done anything? Well, it's a Trojan horse for the New World Order. So what happens is we're basically paying a group of people who think that they are there to stop war from happening, but they're Trojan horsing us by behavioral change, by holding money almost, I would say, hostage. In, and if we want that money, we need to change our behavior. Otherwise, they will exclude us from the world market. And they've made everything so intricately over the years in small steps. So there's puzzle pieces all over the area. And if you put these puzzle pieces together, then you start getting the larger picture of what the United Nations and their initiatives really are. Because so far they have not done anything about global hunger. As a matter of fact, it seems like it's increased, especially with the homelessness after 2020. And they said that they would tackle basically food. Then you have their vaccine mandates with the WHO, trying to push vaccines and medicines to different people in different countries without actually letting them know what these vaccines are about, but giving them grants for almost letting them test on innocent civilians and citizens who have no idea who these organizations are. And so then you get very rich and powerful people who want to be part of this initiative of pretty much imprisoning us globally, and they will feed money into these organizations to make them a lot more powerful. Now, what do we do about that? Right? Like, we're just regular people. What people don't understand is that there's 8 billion of us, and there's 1 to maybe 3% of them out of that 8 billion. And if we combined all of our resources and we changed our behavior based on what's better for us than what is better for them, that is how we then get leverage for the future. So if we build this parallel society, we basically take everything that they have done in a step-by-step way. So they're not, the United Nations isn't an elected official. It is just this entity, I guess, that just gives suggestions. They're consultants, right? So if we then consult and put all of our knowledge, all of our resources, and all of our money into our own businesses, we are taking money out of their pockets. And if we take money out of their pockets, we take power out of their pockets. So the only two things that we can do is one, build a parallel society, and two, do not allow the government, the UN, the NGOs, and any of their subsidiaries to have any effect on our behavioral change. Now, do I understand that we have social issues that do need to change? Absolutely, 100%. But those are not the issues that the UN cares about or wants to even remotely fix. And those are the issues that we can fix by ourselves very simply. What they're doing is they're basically telling us that these world problems are so complex that they require trillions and trillions of dollars and so many years to fix. And all they do is just put fear and fear and fear out there with absolutely no resolution to any of their problems except give us money and we will try and solve it for you. And then somehow the problems just disappear when the money disappears. And that is what we have been seeing. Now, the reason why I want to educate people on how the UN got started, who started it, is because a lot of Canadians are wondering, why is the UN so, hard on Canada? It seems like the Canada, Australia have been pushed to the furthest limit that they can with the UN agenda, whereas other countries are sort of falling behind or fighting back. Now, some of the smaller European countries have also been absolutely and completely infiltrated beyond point, and they are also wondering what is going on. So now it is up to us, the people, just like the people in the Netherlands who watched what the Canadians did during the trucker protest, realized the mistakes that we were making or certain loopholes that we were missing, and they organized better and they decided to make a party for the people by the people. Now, with Canadian and American politics, to get into politics at that level, to even make any sort of change, you have to be one of them. There's no way any of us are infiltrating it. So the only solution that we have is if we change our behavior on not trusting corporations and these NGOs as much as we should trust ourselves and our neighbors and our local businesses. Now, I understand that these corporations have endless amount of money and they have endless amounts of power to basically tell you that they are the best and that you should trust them at all costs, and that small businesses really don't have the resources to do so. And so that is why I think we as a people should be using the exact same agenda that the United Nations used in order to trap us, to free ourselves. Because when we get leverage and we can play, oh, well, if you would like to lock me out of society for this and this reason, that's fine. There's a parallel society that will accept and respect me. And these are also the companies that don't actually follow ESG. So they don't follow environmental anything. They find loopholes and they find third world countries that do not have environmental policies, and they tend to usually pollute said countries beyond repair for many, many decades. And these are the companies that are now then coming on us and telling us that we can't eat meat, we can't fly, we can't drive, or we won't be able to in the near future if we continue to consume like this. But they are not doing anything about the consumption. Now, the United Nations also holds environmental conferences every single year. And if you go to their environmental conference page and you look at their sponsors, Coca-Cola is their number one sponsor. But what's interesting is Coca-Cola is also the number one plastic polluter in the earth for waters. And just like in 2020, when they came down and they told you that you have to close your business or you will not be able to work, you'd think that they'd be able to go and shut down Coca-Cola, or even maybe, I don't know, make them clean up the oceans, because they have billions of dollars. They can literally create jobs if they start an initiative about cleaning up the oceans, started to give money to people who are actually doing something about it. But that's not what they want. They want virtue signaling, they want your tax money, and they want you so broke, so broken spiritually, that you will do anything and everything that they tell us and that they push down on us. So, as long as we understand that the United Nations was built as a Trojan horse in order to come in and control our lives and every aspect of our lives, and that the IMF and the World Bank were actual subsidiaries of the United Nations. So the first branching of the United Nations had nothing to do with the war. I mean, if you look at what they made, it was agriculture, science, education, International Money Fund, and the World Bank, which I think is a little iffy for a group of people who would like to end the war, I should say. So, tomorrow I will go into who the WEF are, who the C40 are, how they're infiltrating your towns and cities and your mayors, how they're enticing them with monetary things. And we will go through absolutely everything that I have talked about at town hall meetings on how people can really, really get their power back in their own towns, and how we can go further to keep the balance, because getting rid of the UN will never happen. They are so powerful that they have conglomerated almost every country into this. Now, with the BRICS sort of exiting, but sort of not, they're almost playing like their own games, because China is still a huge, huge donor to the World Economic Forum, even though they are building this BRICS thing just in case the West and the East decide to, break apart in their alliance of the United Nations. So I'm hoping that I put my article here that I have written in much greater detail about the United Nations on my website tonight. I know there's still a little bit of glitches with, I think I've had 2 people who had issues subscribing. We looked into it. I haven't seen anything yet, but I really hope that you guys ask questions. Share my video if you want to screen record it. The only reason why I have to put this behind paywall is because I do not want to get any ticks on any of my social media things. I will try and put this up on YouTube, hoping that it will stay. If it doesn't, I'll hide it behind my paywall. But I'm hoping I can give you guys as much free information so that you guys know what to do. I will start off very simple. I will give everything in a step-by-step manner. Now, those of us Canadians and Australians, what we're wondering, why is the UN coming down so hard on us? It seems like the UN was started in Quebec with the UK and the US government, using Canada as the place that we signed this agreement on. Now, why would we need to use a third country that isn't even involved in the initial thing under a secret military meeting, I should say, called the Quadrant? I think it's because that they had more nefarious, how should I say this, nefarious intentions than just being United Nations who's here to help us, not create war, help the environment, and so forth. So for the rest of the week, I will go into a step-by-step how NGOs, who the WEF are, who all these big players are, and who we need to watch out for, and the changes that happen on a local level, which is where we have the most power to actually stop them from infiltrating us any further. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. And once again, thank you so much for supporting my page. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I will try and put as much stuff as I can on here for free, just to kind of get the information going and rolling, and hopefully more people get involved so that we can all share the information and the tactics that they are using in different towns and cities, because they do use different tactics. If they lose in one province like they have in Alberta, they're actually using a different tactic in Saskatchewan right now, and they're doing the exact same thing in the United States. Now, with the United States side, though, you guys are a lot more protected because your constitution is so much stronger than ours. And your constitution was made to protect the American people from this very exact thing that is happening right now. So with the Americans, you guys are not only 20 years behind Canada with the push for the social justice and the change and all of that stuff. So with the United States, there's a lot more hope that you guys can stop this. With Canadians, all we can do is make a parallel society so that we get more freedoms, and we actually have the leverage on what goes on and what will be passed in the future. And this is why it's super important for people to voice their opinions online, because they are listening, they are taking polls on what you agree with and what you don't agree with. And until you know the truth about an organization, that is really hard to make the right choice. And that is why I'm going to educate absolutely everybody on the amount of information I have on these organizations. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section. I'm on my Patreon. I am answering the questions first there and then kind of working my way over. And I just wanted to thank everybody again for supporting this movement of people for the people by the people, so that we can actually gain a lot of our power back. Thank you so much. And I hope you subscribe or follow my other socials for any more of the free information that we are giving.